devotional, for the song leading, for your participation in it. That's just exciting. This past week, I had the opportunity, we have a niece up in the Renton area, and she had asked me a question, and it got me thinking, and I thought, I'd like to preach a sermon on this. She says, does God live within time? I thought, that's an interesting thing. And it got me, as I studied about it, both what does time really mean and what does the Bible say about that, I began to think about how we use that phrase. We lose time. We buy time. We save time. We don't have time. We waste time. We find it. We spend it. We have all these I had the time of my life. Or what time is it? So we use it in a number of ways. And then I thought about, we measure time. Everybody in the world does. Most of us do it the same way, but not everybody. And so I thought about what's the Bible say about that. In the book of Genesis, and in chapter 1, I got down there in verse 55. I think that's an error. It should be a little too enthusiastic with the numbers. That should be verse 5. And God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And so we have those broad designations, and we're comfortable with that. But then I got to thinking, why do we do with our time what we do with it? We got 12 hours kind of a day and 12 of night, and the hours vary, but we have 24 hours. Who determined we got 24 hours? And who determined we got 60 minutes? And that minutes should have seconds, much less 60 of them. And well, that got my curiosity up. This is just kind of a little side journey before we get into the main thrust of it. I went back and hit the wrong button here. And we recognize that the Earth spins on its axis about 22.5 degrees, almost 23 degrees tilt. That gives us our seasons and various other things. And we know as our Earth rotates, that gives us day and night, depending on which side is facing the sun. And we say we have a 24-hour day. Now that's a working statement. I don't know if you know, that's really not true. You say, Paul, you're kidding us. No. Our day literally is 23 hours, 56 minutes, and some seconds. And then I thought about that. I said, well, how does my watch figure all that out? It tells me, well, it's noon and this and that. Because we have two different ways of telling time just in that area. Scientists use this, and astronomers, because they want to figure out, okay, this star is at the exact location this night and that night. And so we don't actually have a full 24-hour day. We just kind of pretend that we do. And we have a separate system that we casually use called the solar day, day. Do you really care that it's 4 minutes this way or that way? No, I don't care. Then I looked at, okay, there's our hours of a day, and it's kind of 24, but not exactly. And then we know, besides spinning on its axis, the Earth orbits the sun 365 days. Well, that's not actually right. We know that it's really 365 and a quarter days, because it's 365 days and about 6 hours, but isn't it exactly 6 hours? And you say, well, how do the calendar makers deal with that? Well, we got a leap year. And I just learned something. Leap year is every 4 years, right? No. Leap year is not every 4 years. It may be 4 years, or it may not be 4 years. Ben can tell you what the mathematical quotations is, the coefficient, the strawberries, and whatever. It has all this stuff that they have to figure out. And so, but we just say, hey, there's 365 days, and every once in a while we add another day in, provided that it isn't divisible by this number or that number. Oh, my goodness. Well, as we think about that, so how did we even get to that? The Egyptian astronomers, historians tell us, divided the night in 12 hours and the day in 12 hours. But you know, when we go through the summer and winter, days longer in the summertime and shorter in the wintertime. Well, the Egyptians solved the problem. An Egyptian hour could be any length, and so that had its own chaos. And then the Babylonians came along and said, well, you got an hour, but we should have a, kind of divvy that up a little bit. And so they liked the number 60. And so they divided the hour into minutes and minutes into sections. And about that time, I thought, I think I'm done with that. That it's kind of chaotic, but we live in a chaotic world, and we just say, well, the day is kind of 24 hours, and we're good with that, and the year is kind of 365 days, except when there's a leap year or not a leap year. Yeah, I'm fine with that. So we measure time. But what I struggled with, what is time? You say, Paul, aren't you saying the same thing? Oh, no. If I tell you noodles are 12 inches long, does that tell you what a noodle is? If I tell you it's a spaghetti noodle that's made out of some kind of grain and rolled into a little this or that, well, that tells you what the noodle is. Just telling you how long it is, like we discussed how long time is as we measure it, doesn't really tell you what it is. And I thought, what am I going to do with that? And I thought about it. So interesting, even there's various definitions of time. I looked up in the Bible, because the word time is used both in Old and New Testament. And the lexicographers say that word means time. I go, oh, boy, but it really doesn't tell me anymore. Here's the definition that I was most comfortable with. Time is part of the fundamental structure of the universe, a dimension in which events occur in sequence. And I thought, well, yeah, it's whatever it is, that's how our universe operates, and kind of stuff happens. Now, sometimes a lot of crazy stuff and wars and all this kind of stuff, but, the First World War happened before the second one, and the second before Korean, and all these other things. Here's the last little thing that I found interesting. That time slows as you increase speed, theory of relativity. Light speed is said to be 186,000 miles a second. It's faster than I know how to go. Actually, it's faster than anybody knows how to go, because, if you watch Star Trek and this and that, they have warp 4 and warp 9. That's 9 times the speed of light. So far it appears that Einstein is right, that nothing is faster than the speed of light. In fact, 2011, a laboratory in CERN in Switzerland said, hey, we found this particle that goes faster than the speed of light. And that got the whole scientific physics world on a Twitter. And 5 different teams of independent scientists says, no, you're wrong. And that was 2011. So as far as we know, light is the fastest thing, and it's constant. It always goes at that speed. So let's say, just before we get into biblical things, if you say, let's do some space travel. Now, one other thing happens is if you could go at the speed of light, and as you take off from Earth, you say, boom, instantly you're at the speed of light. For you on board the ship, theoretically, time would stop. You could be gone 200 years. And for you, it would be like the blink of an eye. But 2 centuries would have passed on Earth. Well, that's interesting, but there's a greater problem with traveling at the speed of light. Einstein theorized at the speed of light, not only time stops, but matter's density becomes infinite, and it has no length. So I don't know what would that do for diet plans and people on board spaceships, that you become infinitely dense, but you have no measurable length. So I thought, well, for some other generation, they can deal with what about traveling at faster and faster speed. So that's just kind of an introductory thing in this very challenging subject of time. We say, well, it's time, it's an hour. But we've just noticed there's a lot to that. The fact is, the Bible has a lot to say about it. Time is mentioned over 600 100 times in the Bible. One of the places that you would be familiar with in Ecclesiastes chapter 3, verses 1 and 2. There's an appointed time for everything. There's a time to give birth. There's a time to die. And so Benta's daughter back in the Carolinas, she gave birth to a child. Deliza Champagne up in Monroe, her dad this last week died. There's a time for everything. There's a time to plant. If you want to grow corn, probably November in Washington is not the optimum date to start growing things like that. And there's a time to uproot what is planted. There's a time to harvest things. And so as we think about time and what God has to say about it, the question that my niece asked me last night, does God dwell within time? Well, that gets us thinking about when did time start? Well, if it's really a feature or part of the structure, fundamental structure of the universe, then it didn't exist before the universe. Time, as we think of it, began with creation. Genesis 1 and then verse 1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And so it here is in the beginning, that is in the beginning of time as we know it, as it is counted. And a parallel verse, I just tucked right in there, Hebrews 1:10. In the beginning, O Lord, you laid the foundations of the earth, and the heavens are the work of your hands. So God created the physical universe, and with that, time began. Well, what about it ending? Well, it ends when the universe is destroyed. In 2 Peter 3 and in verse 12, the heavens will be destroyed by burning, and the elements will melt with intense heat. So I said, well, let's have them catch on fire. And so it all melts down, and time stops when the universe stops. We sing a song sometimes, Amazing Grace, how great thou art. And we think about when we've been there 10,000 years, bright shining as the sun, we've no less days to sing God's praise than when we first begun. Why? Because time stops in that situation. Well, if it started with creation and ends at the destruction of the universe, what happened before then? Well, one passage like Jude in verse 25 says, to God be the glory, the majesty, dominion, and authority before all time. So in this period, before time existed, as we think about it, that may God have had all the glory, all the majesty, all the power there was before time ever existed, now, and then forever after the present universe. So we got eternity past, exists before time in the universe. We got right now time as we are on earth, and then forever. That is the future after this total universe is gone. Think about scriptures like Micah 5:2. His goings forth are from long ago, from the days of eternity. One of the arguments comes with individuals that do not believe in God. If we have a physical universe, and most people would agree that we do, how did it get here? As believers, we say God created it. Others say, no, it actually was here forever. I mean, matter existed forever. Well, how did that get here? And so there's a challenge with it. And if it was here forever, and the physical processes are going on, and we're using up energy, the sun's burning its nuclear fuel, I'll say, and becomes a little bit smaller each day, why hasn't it run out of energy? How many ever billions of years would be anticipated for it to exist? How about Psalm 41:13? From everlasting to everlasting thou art God. God, you were before time. When this whole universe is gone, you'll still be God. 1 Timothy 6 and verse 16. To Christ be honor and eternal dominion. May you have the rule forever and ever and ever. That's the Christ we serve. That's the Lord that we partook of the fruit of the vine and unleavened bread. The one that will rule forever. And we belong to him. Well, one of the things as we think about biblical time, is there a time code? I mean, is there some kind of little secret special knowledge thing that every time you come across this statement, this means this, and you can figure out the end of time, who will be the president in, 300 years and such as that? Where some of that idea comes from is incorrectly, I might say, in 2 Peter 3:8. With the Lord, one day is as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years as a day. They say, all right, now here's what you do with that. Every time you come across the word day, you can substitute the 1,000 years in there, and that fits, because this is kind of a secret code. Well, that's really not true at all. It is not a time code. When he says, for God, one day is as 1,000 years. What's that mean? That for God, there's plenty of time to get done whatever there needs to be done. See, if you're like me, I have got on my phone an app that has the things to do, let's say yesterday, or Friday, or Thursday before that, and Wednesday before that. I've always got 20 things to do in the day. Well, how many of them you get done? About 3. And so I check those off the top, and others move on up. There's always more to do than I can get done. And one of these days, somebody's going to poke me in the ground, and they'll find my phone and say, Paul, you haven't finished your to-do list. All right, carry on. You've got something to do. But it's not that way with God. God can always do everything he needs to do. That one day is as sufficient for getting things done as if he had 1,000 years to do that we would like to get done in one day, but never do. But then Peter says, and 1,000, so not only a day is like 1,000 years, but 1,000 years is like a day. Well, what does that mean? That there's no amount of time that can cause God to lose track of his promises, his judgments, or his people. We lose track of things, right? You lose track of your phone, you lose track of Jim Myers is nodding his head. He loses his keys and his phone almost weekly, not exactly, I'm having a little fun there, but it's always getting lost. He leaves it in different places. But you say, well, that's what Jim does. Yeah, we kind of do the same thing, right? We lose track of things. If it's not our keys or our phone, maybe it's an appointment that we made, didn't write down, forgot about, we lose track of time. We said we'd do X and forgot all about that, and so we do those kind of things. What God is telling us, I don't forget. And if you're faithful now, I'll count you faithful for the rest of eternity. I won't lose track of you. All the righteousness that you have done will be counted. But the flip side is also true, that if I've not repented, God's not going to pay attention to that. He said, I remember it as if it were yesterday. Well, what kind of things can we get out of this principle of living in this life that is bordered by time? Well, we can appreciate God's protection. In Psalm 31:15 and following, my times are in thy hand. Let your face shine on your servant and save me in your unfailing love. A parallel to that, Psalm 121 and verse 7. The Lord will protect you from all evil. He will keep your soul. The Lord will guard you from your going out and your coming in from this time forth and forever. And so I thought about, as I was preparing this lesson, of people that have health challenges. The Apostle Paul had health challenges. Timothy had health challenges. It doesn't mean that you won't ever have challenges, but God always cares for you. And I thought about Laura Pisano up there in Monroe and today in the Everett Hospital. What a blessing, surrounded by medical teams with the skills they have in a country and doctors ambulance services, and all these kind of things that God has blessed us with, surrounded by Christians that love you and want to help you in whatever way. God, you are so good to us. My times are in thy hand. But that'll mean everything will go perfectly. Well, things don't always go flawlessly. In Ecclesiastes 9 and verse 11, again I saw under the sun, that is in this earth life, the race is not to the swift. That is, every race is always won by the fastest guy, right? No, they slip, they get cleated, somebody else bumps into them, they stumble, they get the stomach flu an hour before they're supposed to run. So just because you're the fastest person doesn't guarantee you'll win that race. Nor is the battle to the warriors. Just because the guy's really smart, well, it may be some citizen that went over and told the other side, hey, by the way, they're hiding in the woods over there, go get them. Neither is bread to the wise nor wealth to the discerning. As you go through times like the Great Depression, and here's people that, smart people, invest millions of dollars. And then there's guys like Bernie Madoff that steals, what, a 70-something, I'll say $72 billion? I mean, that's crazy. So just because you're smart means you'll be rich. No. But if our times are in his hand, whatever happens to us is going to be okay. He says, nor favor to men of ability. Just because you're talented doesn't mean people will like you and everybody will vote for you. No. For time and chance overtake them all. Our times are in his hand. And if we have that sense of, God, I am just going to trust in you. What if our attitude is that we're going to be more at peace this year? And really carry that thought that our whole hope is with God. Rather, I got to get it all figured out. See, I got my bug out bag and the map of, bad things happen and Seattle falls into the Pacific and somebody, bombs Algona. What am I going to do? Well, I got it all lined out, my car and the motorcycle, and I got a bunker in West Virginia, or whatever it is. God, I will try to make thoughtful decisions, but you are really our hope and our security. Psalm 131 and down in verse 2. He says, surely I have composed and quieted my soul like a weaned child rest against his mother. My soul is like a weaned child within me. That is not a nursing child. It's fussy. Oh, look, I'm hungry and wah. He said, it's all good. And so down in verse 3, he said, O Israel, hope in the Lord from this time forth and forever. He's just encouraging the people to believe in God. Yeah, but what's this president going to do? Oh, well, what's the next president going to do? What did the last president do? And what about my 401k? What about my neighbor's dog? I don't have to answer to all those things. God does. God said, I want you to trust me. It's going to be okay. So what should I do while I'm moving through this earth life? Make the most of the time that you have. I like this little graphic here because it's like a lighted round clock, and so here's the hands of the time. And they're holding, and because that carried that sense of often our time is within our hands. Think about looking for opportunities as you provide for your family and serve others. In Acts chapter 13 and down in verse 36, there he says, like David, King David, the giant killer and warrior, as David served the purpose of God in his own generation and then fell asleep. He made some tragic mistakes, but he did some great things too. That's humans. So think about your life as you're thinking, well, we have little kids, babies and whatnot, and teens and young adults. As you think about, am I serving the purpose of God in my generation? I had wondered when I was a teen, why didn't the last generation do better and get it all figured out? Well, guess what? I'm in this generation. I'm thinking, well, why doesn't this generation do better and get it all figured out? People don't. They have their own chaos in their lives. So you don't control what everybody else does, but you can function on how can you fulfill the purpose of God for your life in the people with whom you interact. I love that passage in Esther chapter 4 and down in verse 14. And Mordecai is trying to get Esther to take that next step, and she's scared to death. And he said, what do you know but that you have come into the kingdom for such a time as this? Maybe the one person that you can reach for Christ is who God wanted, because that person may reach 100 more. And your job is talk to that one person that, I'm kind of scared about it. Because that may be why God has you at this particular time. Well, think about this. In Ephesians chapter 5 and verse 16, the New American Standard Version, that's a little acronym off to the left, says, making the most of your time. And I thought, well, how do you make the most of your time? So I looked at other translations that you might like that kind of carry that flavor. New International Version says, making the most of every opportunity. I thought, no, what do I think about that? The New Century Version said, use every chance you have for doing good. Okay, there's the idea. Rather than I just wasted all day. Boy, what a loser and whatnot. All right, well, here's your list of things, and that really helps me. If I make a list, I try to list almost everything that has some practical application I need to be doing. I don't have a dog, but if I had a dog, I'd walk the dog and paint the house and meet Garner for lunch and talk to my neighbor across the street. Whatever it happens to be in your list, what is the most important thing to do? Well, that'll kind of bump up the things kind of randomly put down in your list. Say, all right, these need to be more at the top. And so, as you think of that, whom could you encourage? Who could you help? Who could you inspire? Who could you invite to worship? What could you memorize? You know, I want to get this one. Oh, I have trouble memorizing. Well, what if you say, I can't do 100 a day. What if you could do one a year? Well, I could probably do one a year, whatever your number is. Where could you grow? He says, because use every chance you have for doing good, because the days are evil. And I thought, wow, they lived in bad times. I thought, wow, we live in bad times. It's always bad times. It's our opportunity to serve God. And so, Paul, what would you say about that? You say, well, if you are, never give up on God. In Revelation chapter 2 and in verse 21, talking about Jezebel of Thyatira, Jesus said, I gave her time to repent, but she does not want to repent. So, Paul, what do you do with people that are just out in the world that they don't want to change? They get to make those decisions. I try to reach people that says, I'd be interested in taking that next step. How do I do that? Oh, how great that is. Or somebody said, I'd like to do it, but I've messed up. Proverbs 24 and in verse 16. The righteous man falls 7 times and rises again. So if you're going along in Christ, say, boy, I've messed up here and over there, and I'm really not doing all that good now. Or, I'm doing a little better now, but boy, I remember, 3 months ago I was not doing good. So maybe you just keep on getting up. You keep on serving God. You keep on holding to God's unchanging hand. Because what we're looking for is life beyond time. Because in heaven there shall be no time. In Matthew 25 and down in verse 46, the righteous will go in to eternal life. And so the Lord calls us. He calls us through the gospel. He gives us the opportunity. You've got the opportunity this morning. If you're not a Christian, not been baptized in Christ, you say, that's what I need to do. We've got a baptistry. Bob Wieland got it all cleaned out. It's got refilled. It's ready for you. The Lord's ready for you. And so repeatedly in the book of Revelation, he said, he that has ears, let him hear. We're going to be singing this song, number 826, I'll Be Listening. If you're thinking, you know what, I haven't been as faithful as I should have, and I want to be more faithful, and I'd like the prayers of the saints. However we can help you, we would be honored to you. Let's be standing and singing this invitation song. 826, I'll Be Listening.